Today we're going to make my friend Julie Tharp's Irish soda bread recipe. And I had no idea when I picked out this recipe that Brianna, who is videotaping this, that's one of her favorite things to eat. So guess what Brianna's going to go home with tonight. So anyway, before Brianna got here, because this is so simple, it calls for 2 cups of buttermilk. And in the past, I'd buy my quart of buttermilk, and sometimes it would end up spoiling because I'd have it for, some different kinds of breads, mini breads, or some kind of cake. Some of the desserts I make also call for buttermilk. So one time I was kind of in a panic. I needed buttermilk for a recipe and I was out. So I went to my trusty Better Home and Gardens cookbook. In the back there's the emergency substitutions. So the substitution for buttermilk is to mix 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and I just have a kind of a generic brand of lemon juice with a cup of milk, just skim milk, whole milk, whatever kind of milk that you use. So I've already put the lemon juice in. So you put in, this calls for 2 cups of milk. So you put in 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and it takes about 5 minutes for it to set up the way the buttermilk should be. So while we're waiting for that, I already have my oven on 325. It's preheating because that also takes a little while, and because this is so quick, we're just going to get the dry ingredients going here first, and then we'll add the buttermilk and 1 egg and butter. So we're going to put in 3 cups of flour. It says to mix it, so I like to use my sifter and just level it. I think I mentioned on one other show that when I was doing some research on flour and the use of cake flour or regular flour, it said not to tap your cup when you're measuring your flour, because the consistency is actually different by doing that. So just, you can put it in your cup and then just level it off. And then it calls for 1/3 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And I've also found that I can become distracted if I'm doing a couple things. So I really have to be careful that I don't get distracted when I'm doing baking powder and baking soda, because sometimes I finish putting it in and then I wonder, did I put it in or didn't I put it in? And that can cause a real problem, if you put in too much or not enough. It calls for a teaspoon of salt. And I didn't ask Julie how much she puts in, but I typically put in about half of what the recipe actually calls for. So these are our dry ingredients. So I'm going to sift this in my large mixing bowl. The flour is already pre-sifted, but I just like to sift all the ingredients together. And then it says to add 1 egg, slightly beaten, and at room temperature. And some people might be a little bit concerned that you have your eggs sitting out, and there really is no problem with having eggs, cream cheese, things like that sitting out at room temperature for many hours. That's what we do. The consistency of your items that you're making is supposed to be better by having all of your cold ingredients all at the same temperature. So that's why they tell us to have your milk and eggs, cream cheese, sour cream, all at room temperature. So you add your 1 beaten egg to the 2 cups of buttermilk, and then slowly mix it in until it's just moistened. It says not to over mix it. I had not made this recipe before. Growing up, I come from an Irish heritage, and my mother was a wonderful bread maker. Typically, I think Monday was the day that she would make bread. And coming from a large family, when she'd make her bread, she made 12 loaves of bread, or 10 loaves of bread at one time. And there was nothing better than to come home from school and find all of this wonderful homemade bread sitting there, and we would all, you know, have a bread and butter snack before we do our chores at night, and there was nothing better than that. I used to make a bran bread recipe, and then after I had my 4th child, I guess I stopped because it was a little bit labor intensive, and I just didn't have, I guess, as much time as when I only had 1 or 2 kids. Okay, then we're going to add 1/4 cup of melted butter, which I already have melted, and we're just going to stir that in again until it's just all incorporated in our ingredients. Gary went to Madison today to visit the kids, so when he comes home, I'll surprise him with having a loaf of hot bread. He actually made another loaf yesterday so that we would have, you know, one to show you how it looks when it comes out of the oven. And tonight we'll have some soup, which he actually made yesterday, and some warm Irish soda bread right out of the oven. Julie had brought the Irish soda bread to a potluck a week or so ago, and it was just wonderful tasting, so I wanted the recipe, and she said it was so easy to make, which it truly is. And I've already greased a 5 by 9 inch loaf pan. And one of my friends was also saying that when she makes her Irish soda bread, that she makes it in either an 8-inch square or, you know, something similar to that. So hers is flatter rather than coming out as a loaf like your typical loaf is going to, using one of these loaf pans. Eat the bread with just, you know, butter, which it just tasted wonderful. So it's a simple thing to do. It's going to be nice with some of our cooking, our catering jobs that we do. We do full catering, so we can take, you know, we always, you know, take bread, so maybe we'll start making some of this homemade Irish soda bread for some of the various meals that we make, and I'm sure people will enjoy it. After you have it in your pan, just kind of level it out a little bit, and then it's all set for the oven. And my oven is already preheated, so we're ready to put in the oven. You can just kind of move it around a little bit to level it, and that's what it looks like uncooked. We're going to bake it at 325 for 65 to 70 minutes. So what I like to do with anything I bake is start it at the lower number, because if it needs extra time in baking, you can always add additional time. But if you put the large, you know, the highest amount of time and it's over baked, then you can't go back. So we can always add a little bit of extra time if need be. So I magically have my loaf of bread ready to cut. This is what the loaf looks like, and it says to make it, you know, a few hours in advance or the night before, the day before. So that's what we did. And just, you can cut it into maybe about 1/2-inch slices. Yesterday Gary made an Italian soup, and he had andouille sausage. He even put some pepperoni. He's been doing more experimenting with his soups. And it's also has potatoes, celery, onions, carrots. You can really put anything in your soup when you make them. I think there's even some cheese in there. So I would typically then put them in my bread basket. So I've got my bread all set to go. And my soup is heated up and ready to pour in the dishes. So we're just going to pour some soup out. And we often have salad maybe for lunch. So for dinner tonight, we'll just have soup and bread. So I'll put this on the dining room table. Gary has really gotten into making a variety of soups. And, you know, a big difference with baking and cooking is when you're baking, most of the time you really have to stick to the recipe. You can't, change your various ingredients. I mean, baking powder, baking soda. And you want to make sure that all of those stay pretty close to the recipe that you're trying. But the fun with soups are that you can pretty much add whatever is in your kitchen, your refrigerator, or in your pantry, or wherever you keep your food. So here's our soup. And we've got the bread on the table. And the table's all set, so we're going to take this out. Hello there. Well, I just got a call from Gary, and he is still in Madison. So I've decided my dining partner tonight is going to be Brianna. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Slice of Heaven. And I know Brianna's going to enjoy the Irish soda bread and the soup that Gary has prepared. And I feel badly he won't be able to join us, but the next time he'll make it. So from A Slice of Heaven, happy cooking.
Thank you.
Glad you could join me.